So.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure to welcome you all, the panelists as well as all the invitees and attendees to the thematic track on the energy transition. The theme being fostering energy transition in India. A very warm welcome to Mr. Rakesh Nath, Mr. Sanjay Dubey, Mr. Narasimhan, Dr. Winfred Dam, Ajay Talegaonkar, Dr. Tripathi and Colonel Vijay Bhaskar. The quest for exploring the implications of high degree of penetration of the renewable energy in the Indian electricity grid started with the Greening the Grid studies some time ago. This study informed us in June 2017 that the VRE penetration of the order of about 25% from 175 gigawatt of renewable energy in 2022 could be integrated with the grid with marginal curtailment in certain scenarios. Thereafter, a committee constituted by the Ministry of Power on large-scale integration of renewables brought out a number of important recommendations. A number of studies have been done during this period. The 2030 was the next target year, which was the focus of the studies. The studies have been conducted by Central Electricity Authority, TERI, and a number of other organizations. And the studies were performed with the objective of doing the least cost investment and or least cost dispatch. The studies have provided a valuable insights in regard to the key issues such as flexibility, storage, and balancing requirements. The power sector being capital intensive in nature, it is essential to look at longer term view for the next 25 to 30 years as well, so that the investments which are made in the intervening period or say the medium term also remain optimal in the long term. Accordingly, we in TERI undertook the studies for the mid-century. Our study goes to answer a number of important questions such as what is the supply mix which is likely to be there in terms of the fossil and non-fossil fuel based capacity and energy which is required to meet the anticipated demand profile. How much of reduction is likely to be there in the CO2 emissions from the power generation resources? What is going to be the impact in terms of the system cost? And what are the key drivers for large scale integration of renewables? And last but not the least, what will be the impact of the operation on the operation of the coal fleet, which is likely to be there in the system at that point of time? Key findings of our study, I would like to present through a slide presentation. Is it visible, slides? Are the slides visible?
Yes, they are visible.
Thank you. So the study which we have done, it explores the electricity transition pathways to 2030. The scenarios and insights, we will talk about them. The model framework which we have used for this study, in terms of the technical granularity, there is a clustering of about 600 generators based on the technology, the unit size, and their variable cost. The cluster generators have been subjected to the constraints like ramp rate and technical minimum, and the characteristics such as the startup costs. On the demand side, each month has been represented by a peak demand week. Hourly simulation has been carried out for the peak week, that is 2016 hours annually, to capture the daily as well as seasonal characteristics of demand as well as supply. Myopic simulation of 5-year blocks from 2025 to 2050 with investment in the terminal year has been undertaken. Each grid region has been represented with respective demand and supply profiles, and the interregional flows are represented using each grid region as one node. In addition, the state-specific RE resource potential zones have been considered. The overall objective of the study is to optimize the capacity expansion and find the least cost dispatch. This study brings the insights in regard to the generation mix, energy storage requirements, and the system flexibility by the year 2050. The scenario framework which has been used in the study has two demand scenarios. One is a baseline demand scenario, the other being the low carbon demand scenario. The distinguishing feature between the two scenarios being the moderate or high efficiency improvement in the appliances, processes, and the penetration of electric vehicles and electric cooking. On the supply side, three scenarios have been chosen. One is a constrained RE scenario, the other being the unconstrained RE scenario, and third, the non-fossil fuel scenario. In the constrained RE scenario, the VRE capacity addition has been limited as per the capacity assessment, RE potential assessment by the government agency, NICE, NIWE, MNRE. In the unconstrained RE scenario, the capacity buildup has been allowed in regard to the RE by relaxing the cap on the RE potential, which has been assessed so far. Non-fossil fuel scenario assumes extreme importance in view of our net zero target by 2070. So we thought this also to be an important scenario to be studied, that where do we land in 2050 if we have to be net zero in 2050. The unconstrained RE scenario, which comes out as the most cost optimal solution. So two sensitivities has been done in this scenario with the low generation reserve and the battery cost sensitivities are there. And in the low carbon demand scenario, there is a low demand scenario as well. The first insight what we got from this is that India's electricity demand, that is the express demand, is set to be fourfold by 2050 from the level of about 1210 terawatt hour in 2019. It is likely to be of the order of 5,000 to 5,200 terawatt hour in 2050 in the low carbon and baseline scenarios, and the corresponding peak demand in these two scenarios is of the order of 700 to 750 gigawatt. The carbon intensity finds at 70 to 90% reduction from today's level. The VRE capacity up to about 85 to 90% is plausible by 2050 at a relatively low system cost, considering a suite of flexible supply options such as the pump storage plants, the battery energy storage systems, etc. The carbon intensity falls to about 0.22 kg CO2 per kilowatt hour in the unconstrained RE scenario and to about 0.07 kg per kilowatt hour kgs of CO2 per kilowatt hour in unconstrained RE scenario. In the no fossil fuel scenario, certainly I think there is no carbon intensity or carbon emissions are there. Just look at the magnitude of the installed capacity which is likely to be there in these three scenarios: 1800 gigawatt, 2100 gigawatt, 2300 gigawatt. That is the type of installed capacity we are going to be witnessing in those 2050. Most importantly, the share of fossil and non-fossil fuel generation in these scenarios, what it is likely to be. In the constrained RE scenario, it is of the order of 24 to 76. In the unconstrained RE scenario, the non-fossil generation increases substantially to about 92%, and the fossil fuel generation share is only 8%. And certainly it is obvious that in the non-fossil fuel scenario, there is 100% comes from the non-fossil sources. The other good news is that the decarbonization of the power sector is expected to reduce the system cost as well. Unconstrained RE scenario is the most cost optimal, as I mentioned earlier. Say the projections which we have done for 2025, from that level, the unconstrained RE scenario witnesses a 40% reduction in the system cost. And let me clarify here, by system cost we are meaning the annual fixed cost, the fuel charges, and the startup cost of the generators. Also the battery energy storage system cost. This is what we have considered on the generation side. In the no fossil fuel scenario, the cost is 7% more than the least cost option of unconstrained RE scenario. And certainly in the constrained RE scenario, we find another 3% system cost increase as compared to the optimal scenario. The battery energy storage system is likely to play a significant role, and in the cost optimal scenario, about 1893 gigawatt of non-fossil fuel based capacity is to be there, and the battery capacity is likely to be of the order of 5200 gigawatt hour. In the non-fossil fuel scenario, the battery capacity, BESS capacity, is likely to be of the order of 7000 gigawatt hour. We find that the sizing of the BESS is a function of quantum of solar generation, which is to be utilized for charging the batteries rather than the duration for which the batteries are going to be discharged. The decline in BESS costs is therefore imperative for bringing down the system cost. We also find the influence of the supply mix, which is likely to be there in the year 2050 on the coal fleet, and we find that the pithead coal plants by 2050 will witness operation at full capacity only for about 63% of the time, but non-pithead coal plants may have to operate at full capacity only for about 1/6 or 1/7 of the time. And non-pit coal head plants may also need to resort to two-shift operation. Moving forward, I think it is extremely important to underline that the grid security is an extremely important issue. With the increasing penetration of renewables and other static devices, sources of supply into the system, and the significant reduction in the rotating mass and the system inertia, power system stability studies assume utmost importance. There is no doubt about it. The cross-border electricity trade of India, which is right now of the order of 1% of the total energy supply we have in the country, is likely to assume greater proportions in the coming years. With the One Sun, One World, One Grid initiative, with the initial plan to interconnect the Middle East, South Asia, Southeast Asia, and Africa, I think it is expected that the cross-border electricity trade will see new dimensions. Eventually, the One Sun, One World, One Grid initiative envisages a global interconnection of power systems, and thereafter the further gains could be there in terms of reduction in operational reserves, the system flexibility requirements, and the storage requirements. Before ending my presentation, I would like to say that the evolution of technologies and their cost trajectories are extremely important. Whatever studies have been done today are based on our current level of understanding in regard to the technologies and their likely cost trajectories. In addition to this, consumer behavior, I think is extremely important in a developing country like India with low per capita electricity consumption. The demand profile is also likely to witness significant change. Therefore, periodic review of such long-term studies is a must. That is all I think I wanted to bring out as part of this study, which has been conducted by my colleagues Raghav Pachari, Nashwin Rodrigues, Shubham Thakre, Ranjit, and Jatinder. With this, I would like to close my presentation, and we would be looking forward to the discussion by the panelists and see what are their impressions in regard to these studies and other dimensions which they would like to flag. I would just like to check whether Mr. Alok Kumar has joined. Otherwise, we will go over to the panel discussion. So I think he is not yet there. So may I now request Mr. Rakesh Nath, former member of Appellate Tribunal for Electricity and former chairperson of the Central Electricity Authority, to take over the proceedings from here on. Mr. Rakesh Nath, as you all know him so well, he needs no introduction to this audience or any other audience. He has been, apart from being the key positions he has held, which I mentioned a few minutes ago, I think he has been my guide and mentor in the Central Electricity Authority, and I have had the pleasure and privilege of working and learning from him quite significantly. Over to you, sir.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Saxena ji, for inviting me to this very interesting session on the energy transition, very interesting topic. I am not going to go into any introduction or anything because we have all very experienced, knowledgeable people here. So I'll straight away come to the main issues, and I like to flag a few issues. The first important thing that I want to flag is the close coordination between the center and the states, and the right policy interventions and the regulatory directions from time to time. And then we can take small steps continuously towards our ultimate or larger goal of net zero. Center may make the broad policies complemented by the policies of the state government and supported by the regulations by the appropriate commission. For example, yesterday we had a green hydrogen policy, which provides for various incentives for the development of the green hydrogen, waiver of ISTS charges, open access provisions, banking, connectivity, availability of land. Now the complementing policies of state government and the regulations of the appropriate commissions have to follow so that the things can move in the ground. As far as the resource planning is concerned, I think we require both top down and bottom up approach. The resource adequacy planning at the national level will give us broadly the directions and to the states, but ultimately we have to see that each state is an independent control area and it has to tie up its own resources to balance its own demand and supply at all times. And traditionally, and even now, many states are doing that planning based on the peak demand and energy requirement per day, which is no more valid in the high RE scenario. And therefore, a detailed resource adequacy planning, which ensures the capability of the system to meet the demand round the clock, round the year is ensured. And the regulators will have to ensure that the resource adequacy is implemented and enforced in the states. So maybe they can make regulations, and every year the distribution companies will put up their plan, resource adequacy plan, a perspective plan and an annual plan for approval of the commission. Distributed renewable energy, I think, is very important, and particularly in the rural area, because it will ultimately help the distribution companies to reduce their cost of supply. The average cost of supply of the distribution company at the LT level is 6.5 to 7 rupees, and we can generate RE power right near the load centers in rural areas at much lower cost. So I think we should have more aggressive plans for solarization and development of small RE projects of 1 megawatt, 2 megawatt size, 3 megawatt size, connected to the existing sub-transmission and distribution system. And with the model that the developer supplies this energy to the distribution company at the feed-in tariff or competitive tariff, whatever it is decided, and this is going to attract a lot of small entrepreneurs and rural employment. And at the same time, it will, since this capacity can be done in comparatively lesser time, it will help in meeting our RE targets. And on the integration of renewable energy and resilience of the grid, the first priority is to exploit full capacity and full flexibility available at the existing conventional resources. The CRC has already made regulations for technical minimum for thermal and a mechanism to compensate for the loss of efficiency. So there is no problem as far as the interstate generating stations are concerned. But even today, the full flexibility available at the intrastate generating station, thermal stations, is not being exploited because they are being backed down only up to 70 to 80% only. And therefore that has to be done. We should also make a market mechanism where a generator who is willing to invest money to increase the flexibility below 55% can be allowed to recover the cost by exploiting the market. On the demand response, I think we have to work on the demand response side also. And large C&I customers can directly provide the support. But for smaller consumers, I think we may need aggregators to aggregate the demand of the smaller consumers to give the required relief whenever required. Storage, I think we have to start planning for the storage. Battery storage prices are reducing and likely to reduce further in future. But today, the prices are still very high, and therefore, barring one or two states, no state has taken any action on the storage. I think we have maybe in the initial years, they may require some viability gap funding to kickstart a few pump storage or battery storage plants. And later on, when the prices come down, then they can directly do the resource planning. Green hydrogen, I think, has a great future, and it has great advantage of providing linkage between energy supply and demand in both centralized and decentralized manner. We may also require synchronous condenser, as you have seen in the study which was projected by Mr. A.K. Saxena, that in 2050, in high RE scenario, the inertia of the system may be very low, and maybe we may require the synchronous condensers, and maybe the thermal plants which are going to retire can be converted into synchronous condensers to provide the short circuit level and the inertia to the system. And lastly, I think the energy conservation and efficiency, we have to continue enhancing our steps. The BEE's energy conservation code on commercial and residential building, I think they should be adopted by the local bodies. And labeling program has to be enlarged to more appliances, and maybe we may have codes for energy efficiency in MSME sector in due course. I think this is all I want to say from my side, because we have very interesting panel and very experienced panel, and we would like to hear them. So what I would suggest that I give 4 to 5 minutes to each panelist for giving their perspective, and then I can pose a few questions on your subject, if that's okay with you.
Sir, before you start with the panel discussion, I would like to welcome Mr. Alok Kumar, the Secretary Power Government of India. Very warm welcome to you, Alok ji. Thank you so much for sparing 15 minutes from your busy schedule. We know that you had a meeting, you were having a meeting with the Honorable Minister. Thank you so much for sparing the time. Mr. Alok Kumar needs no introduction to this audience or any other audience. He has a great amount of experience working at in the central government as well as the state government in the power sector. He started, I think, the early years he spent in the reforms and restructuring of the power sector when the Electricity Act 2003 was being framed. And thereafter he moved as the Secretary of Central Electricity Regulatory Commission, and he has taken a lot of senior positions as the Power Secretary as well as the CMD of UP Power Corporation, as Chairman of the Corporation. I think further elaboration, all of us are very well aware. So over to you, Mr. Alok Kumarji. Thank you so much for coming, and we would like to have your impressions.
Thank you, Saxena ji, and my apologies for being late because there was another program which was organized by FICCI and MNRE, the Chintan Baithak. So I am rushing from that, and I've got next meeting somewhere else outside this building. So I will share my perspective on this very important topic towards a resilient planet, the World Sustainable Summit being organized. TERI. So thank you very much for all the kind words you have spoken about me. A lot of knowledge is available now in public domain about India's perspective for the net zero by 2070 and what all we are doing, what all we have achieved. The India has a track record of the climate change initiatives which we are all proud of, and we can boast before the whole global community the spectacular achievement India has been able to showcase. The journey to net zero by 2070 will be very, very challenging. It's a journey over more than 40 years, close to 50 years, and there are many, many uncertainties in future about technological developments, our demand projections, our ability to bring down the costs of the storage and all. Mr. Rakesh Nath is speaking very rightly that the demand side management is I'll say this should be a starting point. Because if we are able to better manage our demand while we meet the India's aspiration for economic growth, that much job will done for net zero. Because if we are able to say enhance energy efficiency, energy conservation, that much battle will be won. So that is being done by Bureau of Energy Efficiency at the Government of India level with the support of all the ministries, all departments with the states. We've got a very good track record in reducing our emission intensity by about 28%. Our target was 33% in 2030. Target has been again raised to 45%. So these efforts would need to be continued even beyond 2070. And we also have to pay adequate attention to the time of use tariffs so that we can push demand to the time where we want, where we have resources. That will bring down a lot of costs of flexibility, storage and transmission. Let us come to now supply side. I see supply side in two phases. The current phase, which has some visibility up to 2035, 2040. In this phase of around 20 years, we have the current technologies of solar generation, wind generation. We also have the battery storage, pumped storage projects, and on the horizon is the hydrogen storage, hydrogen economy. I will pose two questions for the sake of discussion. First is at what cost should we promote renewable energy? And second is how to handle the issue of solar autonomy. So we must work for least system costs so that India's journey to net zero by 2070 doesn't hamper our economic growth and our competitiveness. So we have to work at the least system cost options. I very strongly feel that while we aggressively pursue our targets for solar and wind generation, we must pay equal attention to hydropower and biomass for two reasons. If we pursue biomass and hydro, which are in the nature of firm power, our requirements for transmission costs and storage costs will come down. These two resources, biomass and hydro, will also to some extent handle the issue of the solar autonomy. When the sun is not available for 3-4 days continuously in an area. There is third reason. The solar and wind resources are in certain pockets of India, Western India and Southern India. But biomass is available all across India. Hydro is available in East and Northeast and Himalayas. So if we develop biomass and hydro, we will have green jobs all across India. So there are several benefits. We should spread all our efforts to all possible resources of renewable energy while we aggressively pursue our solar and wind resources. Talking of storage, we should see beyond battery storage. Battery may seem very, very attractive because costs are coming down. It is easy to set up. But if we talk of solar autonomy or long-term storage in terms of days, then pumped storage projects and hydrogen storage will be of great value to India and our energy systems. So we must invest in, promote, incentivize development of pumped storage projects. Ministry Power is working very, very intensively to see what regulatory incentives can be given to a pumped storage project, how better financing can be done, in what manner we can facilitate easier environmental clearance to off-river PSPs, how to better do the tariff structuring. We are handling all the fronts possible. We have come out with a new hydrogen policy because we believe that hydrogen as a resource for both energy, electricity, as well as feedstock, it holds great future for us, and we must rise to the occasion, and we should work collectively to exploit fully this option. I'd like to give you one more perspective. We were reviewing the power scenario in Uttar Pradesh yesterday for settling down how much solar power they can more pick up in next 1 or 2 years under Kusum project. We sat down with them and we realized that how many PPAs they have already done of the conventional power, how many PPAs of solar are in pipeline, how much their commitment, and to what more they can do. We came to conclude that they can do around 500 megawatt more immediately in next 2 years. Because currently they are backing down their stations where variable charge is as low as rupees 1.8 per unit. Whereas solar power, even after subsidy, is available at rupees 2.25. So we have to work further to bring down costs of solar power to make it easier to absorb in state power systems. We have to reduce the cost of storage so that the solar can be stored. So our job is cut out. We must use all the sources of renewable energy. We must create green jobs in all pockets of India. And we must further reduce the cost of solar energy. We should take all possible alternatives by improving the efficiency of solar generation, by bringing down the financing cost of solar powers, by reducing all the barriers in the financing, the international financing, and giving them all the push. The phase beyond 2040, I see we have to start working and continuous working in the next 20 years. So that by that time, we are able to develop the carbon capture and utilization to keep on using the minimum possible coal-based generation in a clean manner. And we should also work on the new technologies for atomic power-based electricity generation, because our scientists are telling there are now new types of nuclear power plants possible, small size, localized, simpler technology. So India must invest in those two technologies and work in the next 20 years so that by 2040, when we are about to reach the maximum possible exploitation of renewable energy, we have those two technologies on the horizon. Future is uncertain. If we can bring down the cost of storage not only for hours but days together, then maybe we will not require these two technologies, but future is uncertain. So we must invest in those two technologies. And last thing before I conclude, I like to work is the carbon market. In other countries, the carbon market is a very important institution, important mechanism to incentivize financing of green energy projects. Because whatever you generate in terms of carbon credits, you can sell them and others can buy. There are a number of corporates who are committing to voluntary targets. So India is working for developing a national carbon market, and we have a goal for rolling out this market by the end of this calendar year. Maybe it may take 1 or 2 months here and there. So those were some perspectives I wanted to share with you, and thank you very much. And I apologize, I will not be able to listen to the future proceedings. I have to go for some other meetings, but I will be eagerly waiting for the recommendation and conclusions of this summit. Thank you very much, Saxena ji. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thanks for your joining us and sparing the time. And we take note of all the important points which you have mentioned about, and we will certainly factor them into our research and analysis as we move forward. Thank you so much. May I now again request Mr. Rakesh Nath to take it forward, the panel discussion.
Okay, so has Mr. Sanjay Dubey joined?
Yeah, I'm there.
Yeah.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Mr. Sanjay Dubey. How are you? I can't see you.
I'm there.
Oh, yes. Now I can see you. So let me introduce Mr. Sanjay Dubey.
Hinterland of Madhya Pradesh, the southernmost part of Madhya Pradesh, rather.
Okay.
Sorry for being late, but I could listen to you as well as to Alok Kumar sir.
So Mr. Sanjay Dubey is the Principal Secretary of Energy of Madhya Pradesh. He is also heading the New and Renewable Energy Department. He is an alumnus of IIT, has done BTech and MTech, and Masters in Economics and PhD in Transportation. May I request Mr. Dubey to give the perspective of the distribution companies and the challenges that states are facing and likely to face in large integration and energy transition, and what policy push you are giving for decarbonization in the state.
Thank you very much for giving this opportunity to be there in this August gathering. I could listen to both of you, and I must say that some of the issues that I wanted to raise has already been raised, but I would like to bring specifically the perspective of the state government as to what challenges they are facing and what are some of the steps that we have been able to so far take in the interest of our consumer, in the interest of maintaining the electricity supply, and in the interest of sustaining the requirement for the economic growth. We all are aware that for economic growth, there is a requirement, and it is almost now a given thing that we need to have 24/7 electricity supply. No more governments can say that there can be power cuts, there will be reduction in the voltage, or there will be fluctuations or interruptions. Now, given this scenario, there are multiple challenges that the government have to face. On top of it, there is a competitive populism amongst different governments to declare subsidized supply of electricity, which to my mind is the single most important point of maybe derailing the whole efforts that the government of India and the state governments putting together are trying to make to ensure that there is a regular and a good quality supply of electricity. So starting from the point of view of the demand side management, there are few initiatives that the state government has taken, and I do feel privileged to share those with us. One of the major initiatives that the state government of Madhya Pradesh has taken is called a program called USHA, which is Urja Saksharta Abhiyan, or Energy Literacy Program. The idea is that each unit saved is around 1.4 units generated. And the idea is that not only the people who, the breadwinner of the house should be the one who should be taking care of it, but the toddler should start learning the tricks that how to save this power. And that is how there is a whole big program in which we are trying to reach to each and every individual, right from a toddler to the elder most person in the family, as to how he can reduce his consumption without compromising on any of his activities. The second important demand side management that we are looking forward is we have tried managing, because of the penetration of renewable energy, just like what our supply side is, we have tried to manage the demand in that way. And for that, what we have done is, though there is a flexibility in supply hours for the agricultural consumers, so we have tried providing electricity in the daytime when the sun is peaking up, or the generation from the solar energy is picking up, which has led to a substantial reduction in the cost, as well as least amount of load onto our transmission system. So coming down to the supply side of it, if we see these two things taking shape, and we have been in touch with the long-term analysis of our requirement with TERI, and TERI has done a study with us. They have presented the study reports few days back. Mr. Saxena was the one who is there. We are also looking at demand of how the agricultural load is varying within country. And it is not because of the season, it is not because of the demand in the market, it is because of also the MSP that is given to a particular crop, which determines what the farmers are going to sow in the field. And because of which it is always very challenging for having a long-term perspective of how the demand is going to grow for the agricultural operations, for which we have tied up for developing an AI/ML based system with MIT US to do a study with Madhya Pradesh, and we are doing that study to ensure that we have a long-term perspective as to how we should be managing that. The third thing that we are trying to do is doing a study with IIT Delhi on a Kusum A and C perspective as to why and what needs to be done so as to ensure that there is a huge demand in Kusum A and C. To give you a perspective, Madhya Pradesh is doing 200 megawatt in distributed energy system through Kusum A, B, and C. We have floated the bids, we have the farmers, we have the cooperatives, we have the panchayats coming forward, establishing solar power of up to 2 megawatt, what Mr. Rakesh was also mentioning. And it is without any load to our transmission network because they are getting injected at 33/11 kV. So there is huge amount of saving that we are going to make because of the feed-in tariff, because of no enhancement of transmission network required. But the challenge here is there is multiple other situations and resources that can be done. Rooftop solar is another that we should be looking at, but that is not picking up in most of the state because the governments are giving a subsidized power. So there is a challenge where people find that if I am getting per unit electricity of 1 rupee, why should I invest into a capex and pay for the solar energy getting generated? So as a policy, we have to ensure that there is an incentive for a person to set up and capture the solar energy, and there is what we need to undertake this cost. As we grow, and the other issue that would come when the renewable energy gets more and more penetration, or as Honorable Prime Minister has promised that by 2050 we should have about 50% of our generation coming from renewable energy sources. The more the renewable energy sources are there, we will require storage, whether it is battery storage or whether pumped hydro storage. And these costs as of now are not, if I can't say, but they are too costly for any state to undertake. And here I agree, Mr. Rakesh, that when he said that there has to be some EGF or incentive for the states to come forward. No policy at the central level can become successful until the states own it up, and the states are finding it difficult to go forward in generating and creating resources for storage because the cost as of now prevailing in the market, though there is a trajectory which people do claim that it will go down in the future to come, but the states have to be encouraged to come forward to have their storage facilities, and that can only happen when there is a VGF or some other incentives to be given. This is required for the stability of the grid. This is required for encouraging the states to come forward to have more and more RE penetration. Else, after a certain level, for Madhya Pradesh, as TERI has done it, up to 30% of RE generation, probably it is cost effective for a state like Madhya Pradesh. But beyond which, if we have to go for a RE penetration, up to 50% of generation, probably we will have to invest lots of money, and it would be a cost and burden to the customer or to the consumer. So from the state's perspective, I would say that we have to go to encourage the storage if we have to ensure that there is a RE penetration. We have to manage demand side management. We can't be only looking at supply side management. We can't keep on adding the capacities and just ensuring that there is a growth in electricity requirement. And we would have to go for a decentralized distributed energy resources. That's the only way forward if we have to achieve this target. So that's all that I wanted to say, and I would be open for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Dubey. Thank you so much for your a very interesting talk. I have one question from you. Mr. Alok Kumar has laid emphasis on development of biomass and hydro projects, and rightly so, because he's saying that we can't depend too much on solar. So there is no organized biomass market, and I have found that the regulators, when they give the tariff orders, they give some biomass price with some escalation, and which is not, it does not turn out to be, in reality it comes out to be different, because there is no organized market, and all these biomass projects then end up in stagnating or generating at a very low plant load factor. So how can we organize a biomass market where prices can be fixed by some body and somebody who collects the biomass and then sells to the developers? And second is the development of the hydro plant, because it's a water is a state and the center subject. So the hydro site are allocated by the states. So what is the state's policy on the allocation of pump storage site? Because pump storage, you can't get free energy or anything. So how do we see that the allocation of sites is done to credible investors for development of the PSPs?
Yeah, very valid point. In fact, I'm happy to share that Madhya Pradesh is the second state after Andhra Pradesh, which is developing its pumped hydro storage. Not only the policy, but also started their work on the sites. We have a Gandhi Sagar Dam in western part of Madhya Pradesh, and their Greenco has shown their interest. We have signed an MOU with them, have also given a policy clearance, and fortunately we are also coming up with the renewable energy policy of the state of Madhya Pradesh, where we are encouraging not only the pumped hydro storage, battery storage, but also the manufacturing of any of the renewable energy resources, including the hydrogen generation. And there are multiple initiatives and multiple concessions that the state government is willing to offer to any investor who is interested in doing it. So yes, pumped hydro storage needs to be encouraged, and that is what we have tried doing in Madhya Pradesh. There is a 1440 megawatt of pumped hydro storage capacity that we are planning to build and should be operational by the end of 24 or latest in the first quarter of 25. It's required, but pumped hydro storage has a disadvantage that it can't react immediately to the grid instability, and therefore you would require a backup of battery also. So pumped hydro, for a long-term perspective, for a longer duration, it is the need of our, the battery cannot take care of that. Besides, battery has a long life, a smaller life, 10 years at the most. And the disposal of battery itself is an ecological challenge that has to be addressed. While all of these negativities or externalities are not there with the pumped hydro storage, and we have storage resources spread across the country, so it's possible to have a decentralized storage situations. We have to encourage them. We have to provide that the land for any developer who is doing it. We have to sign PPAs, giving them the certainty that yes, if they are going to invest in it, there are procurers who would take into account. So that is how we should be proceeding as far as the state governments are concerned, and it will create a stability within the system. It will take care of the DSM charges, it will take care of the penalties, so it will be in overall interest of the state. As far as biomass generation is concerned and utilization is concerned, you are very right when you say that there are no developed market as such. Can we explore, and this is all, I have not applied myself to a greater extent on this, and you are right when the regulatory commission keeps giving these kind of mandate to involve the biomass utilization. The thermal powers are not, generation plants are not using it for two reasons. One, the availability is not assured because there is no one single procurer or there is no organized body which can assure the constant supply of it. And the boilers have to be designed in such a way that they are able to take certain percentage of it. And the second part is that the cost is a little higher on the side, so it has an implication onto the consumer part of it, and that is why the generation company as well as the states are not very keen on undertaking it until there is an environmental dictate that you cannot burn this stubs and can't do anything. So the whole, if we have to develop this market, we have to allow this to happen, just like as food grains are sold up in the mandis. Similarly, we can have that kind of resources getting generated, whereby we recognize some of those procurers or aggregators who can procure it on our basis, and will try and go forward and provide it, and we can have a long-term agreements with these providers. Also, certain amount of price ceiling would be required if we have to ensure that there is no black marketing or stocking of these biomass, and then only probably the generating companies can come forward. Mr. Saxena wants to ask some question. Thank you very much. I hope
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Saxena, you want to say something? You're on mute.
I just wanted to mention that Dr. Dam has a next meeting from 4 p.m. If you could slot him in next, that would be wonderful.
Doctor? Okay. Okay. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. So next speaker is Dr. Dam. He's head Indo-German Energy Program, GIZ, and he is known for his active engagement in shaping renewable energy policy of Germany. We would like to know what lessons India can learn from Germany, particularly in development of the distributed renewable energy, and how Indo-German cooperation will help in financing or technology transfer for the smooth energy transition in the country. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you all the speakers we had. And I'm really every time again impressed how fast India is moving on so many things. And let me start out with, as the speaker said, on energy efficiency and demand shift. So as Germany says, we have to put energy efficiency first. And the best unit produced is the unit not absorbed and not requested and not demanded for. So we have to increase our effectiveness on those sides. Second part, we are talking about flexibility. Yes, the beauty of India is that you have always solar during every day. And the fluctuation between solar weak and solar rich days is very weak in respect to, let's say, comparison to the northern hemisphere or very southern hemisphere. So in Germany, for example, you have nearly no solar during winter time, and we need to have storage for weeks to come. India only requires storage for a night. So how beautiful is this? And how cost efficient it is? And getting to this kind of storage, let's come back to demand side opportunities. And there are many. So we can ramp up and down fossil power plants significantly more than it has been achieved up to now. So instead of having 55%, we can go to at least 40%. And very many coal-fired power plants in Germany are ramping down to 10% only with coal only. As it has been mentioned, demand shift, nicely by Madhya Pradesh, how to shift agricultural demand from nighttime to solar time. Marvelous. Pan-India, easily 10 gigawatt can be shifted and saved in regards to storage requirements. And of course, any storage is fine, be it battery or pump storage. The critical issue is that the market incentives is not yet given. So what is the advantage of providing electricity during peak times in the night? And this is needs some market regulatory achievements and adjustments to incentivize the market to go for these kind of demand shifts. Coming to the generation side, I'm glad Mr. Saxena once more, TERI has provided the study, valuable study, as many others did, like IEA, like Bloomberg and REN 21 and so on, how much renewable is required for the years to come. And I like to refer to Honorable Prime Minister Modi requesting 450 gigawatt renewables in New York, or let's say 500 gigawatts non-fossil by 2030. Deduct 150 roughly given, brings you to 350 divided by 7 remaining years. brings you to about 50 gigawatt of additional renewables additions annually. In the last few years, we had about 10 in India. I think they peaked somewhere in 17 by around 15. So we need to increase the level from 10 to 50. And if you come up with the other request of Mr. Modi, be energy self-sufficient by 2047, electrify the entire transport sector, lead the world in hydrogen, or reach a $5 trillion economy, or double farmers' income. I always like to say, you better aim at 100 gigawatt renewable additions every year. And in the TERI paper, if you make a linear projections, and I'm not sure how much of this hydrogen has been already included for the abatement of coal in steel and fertilizers and so on, you might come to a very similar number of about 100 gigawatt renewables required. And what is nice in the study as well, it nicely demonstrates that for the economy, you're bringing down the cost of currently about 4 rupees to 2.5 rupees per unit. So you reduce and have, as Mr. Alok Kumar requested, a least cost approach. But therefore you need to enlarge renewables very significantly. And the question is how to do it. Well, India has sadly not achieved 175 gigawatts by 22 yet. Still some months left to go. We had some troubles in India last October because these 50 gigawatts were missing in the energy sector. How to bring down cost? Very easy. De-risk the renewable sector. Make sure that contracts which are signed are being fulfilled, which are going to be honored from all sides. Pay in time. And if you de-risk these solar contracts, then prices are coming down even further. And then, of course, CAPEX and interest rates is an issue. But as long as you are coming up with, let's say, a 40% special customs duty, or however it's called, then, of course, this is not going to reduce the solar prices and henceforth the electricity cost in the market. I just want to remind us, I feel like there's funds and cash missing in the entire energy sector because electricity is fairly cheap in very many instances, but on top, it's not being paid by everyone. And who is not paying? Very often, I would say public hands. So let's have public institutions paying the electricity bills that discoms are enabled to pay generators and thereby reduce the risk of the sector. I'm looking very much forward, and Germany is really eager to help India and other countries to go ahead. And it's not we know the solution, it's we jointly have to go ahead and find proper solutions. And take this year where Germany is heading G7 and India starts to head G20. It's a marvelous time to shake hands and bring the world forward and progress in decarbonization. And I'm happy to talk far more about hydrogen is going to come, but I think this would be up for the next panel discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Dam. Thank you for your perspective. And you are right when you say that timely payment have to be ensured to the renewable developer to bring down the cost. I think that is a very big issue considering the present state of affairs of our distribution companies. The next speaker is Mr. S.R. Narsimhan. He is CMD POSOCO. Mr. Narasimhan has a very long experience in the operation of load dispatch centers. I also had an opportunity to work with him in the initial, I think when he joined the NREB. And I was really fortunate to get his association in some committees. Recently, I think we worked on the Indian Electricity Grid Code, and we got a lot of support and knowledge from his vast experience in system operation. Now, I'll request you to briefly tell your perspective, basically about the flexibility and resilience in the grid, and how POSOCO is preparing for the energy transition.
Right. Yeah, thank you, sir. In fact, we have already been, like energy transition, it's a fairly long journey, and I would say that it's basically an ultra marathon, one has to run. And we started this race sometime in 1982 when all the state grids were connected, and we had 5 regional grids. So that's when we started this journey. And in the initial years, of course, the energy transition meant actually, giving access to the public. Access was a big issue, and all the work was done. And so shortages were, they were quite chronic at that point of time. And when one talked about reliability of grids, reliability has 2 components, adequacy and security. So the more thrust was on the adequacy, both whether it's generation or whether it's transmission. So that was the initial thing till about 2015-16 when the adequacy problem actually got solved. And then we found that the load curves, they started taking a natural shape and becoming peakier. That's when we realized, even before renewable energy was nowhere on the radar, even 175 gigawatt was no longer on the radar at that point of time. And we found that, yes, flexibility is going to be a key area, and so we worked with the Central Commission and, the technical minimum, minimum turn down levels of coal-fired units. That dialogue started right from 2015, and before we had a grid code amendment in 2016. So all that was put in place, which now it's being talked about that it's required for renewable energy integration. But I would say that even without renewable energy also, the coal-fired flexibility that was long overdue. In fact, it's since we have a huge base load capacity, France and other countries had more of nuclear. That's why they needed pumped hydro. But we needed coal flexibility just to take care of the load shape also. And now increasingly the afternoon belly management requires coal flexibility during the daytime also. So that part is done. So essentially in the phase 2, we are replacing coal with wind and solar, and that's where slowly the problems are, the adequacy problem is taken care of, but gradually security related issues come to the fore. And I really liked the last slide of Mr. A.K. Saxena, where he talked about the stability part, so that would increasingly become very important. And there are not many studies which looks at a 100% RE scenario. How would the system be stable? Today, it's difficult to envisage what the grid of 2030 and beyond would look like from transmission perspective. All these production cost modeling studies, they look only at the balancing part, 8760 hours. But how would the flows vary? That becomes very important. And how can storage help in this area? That becomes very important. And so 2030 and beyond, it's going to be a different dimension altogether. I mentioned it's an ultra marathon. So whether the lessons we have learned from the first marathon would help us in running the next 42 years, that's something which, we have to relearn lot many things, unlearn and relearn lot many things. And so that's how I view it. And coming to the energy efficiency and energy conservation, I just had one thought in a lighter vein, See, 2 decades, 3 decades back, entire families in India, many of them used to sleep on the rooftop, and the amount of energy which they used to save by not running air conditioners. And today you have a situation where we are wrestling with installing rooftop solar just to run the air conditioners, and so it's quite ironical, so when we talk about energy transition, I'm not too sure. So definitely the building efficiencies, they would also become increasingly important. Thank you. I'll stop at that.
So, Mr. Narasimhan, how was your experience of the AGC, which you have recently commissioned?
Right. Of course, automatic generation control, it's more than 80 years old philosophy and technology. Unfortunately, in India, we didn't have this in place. So when we had to implement it, some advantages which we had, of starting late, that we could go on an entirely different philosophy. We could have, right from the National Load Dispatch Center, try to balance on an all India basis. We could also have the flexibility on doing it on a regional basis with each region as a control area. So that advantage we had by starting out late, and that's something unique, which in no other part of the world it has been implemented. Of course, we understand that continental Europe is trying out that philosophy through sharing of secondary reserves, but that would be, less a year or two later once the Picasso scheme comes. But here, when we had to start, there was a number of issues which we had to resolve. The communication links with all the power plants in the country, and the testing, because even the local power plant C&I engineers, also control and instrumentation engineers, were to interact. We had to convince them, and all the testing and commissioning, that took a good amount of time. And there was one paradigm shift, with AGC. For regulation services, the payments would be made based on SCADA data. That was something quite different, which in the Indian markets, people were not used to that. So we had to establish that system also, whereby you pay the generators based on the 4-second signals aggregated at the regional load dispatch. So that was a shift. And now going forward, we look at a lot more challenges, especially around integrating storage devices. That's, in fact, the whole world is on a learning curve as far as storage is concerned. It's a different creature altogether. So how different services, how do they interplay with one another? The energy market, the ancillary services market, and there is a merchant capacity also. So how do these three sets of transactions for the same asset, how should they interplay? Double counting, all those issues, a host of issues are there, which we will have to learn. And we are keenly looking forward to the first pilot that would be commissioned, where we would get to learn all these things. And the second issue, which we are very keen to further learn, is with the green hydrogen policy that has been announced. We would also start looking at from day one, how these electrolyzers can provide primary, secondary, and tertiary response. And that would be interesting. We would be keenly watching the space and learning from the experiences elsewhere. So that I think we should start from day one at putting the right set of standards in place to ensure that this happens. And of course, the next would of course be at the state level, automatic generation control. And thank you.
It's a high time that the AGC should also come in the states, along with the deviation settlement mechanism. So our next speaker is Mr. Ajay Telegaonkar, Chief Engineer CA. So if Mr. Telegaonkar could give his perspective about the resource adequacy planning and the studies that CA has done about the optimal generation mix.
Yeah. Thank you, sir. I will first touch upon the issues of planning as advised by you, and then if time permits, then I can touch on some other issues which were highlighted in the background paper which was circulated for this session. So, sir, coming to planning, the first and most important step in this is the load forecasting. And what we find is that discoms at present are lacking in this thing. So the need of the hour is to make them available the forecasting tools, which will have adequate capacity not only to forecast the load for the next hour, going up to a medium term and long term beyond 5 years and like that. So that is only first step, because unless you forecast the load properly, your entire planning will go haywire. Secondly, sir, as you said in your opening remarks, that the planning is not only should be from the top bottom, but it should be from the bottom up also. So CA is doing planning at the national level, but it has to be translated into the state level plans and ultimately into DISCOM level plans also. And then what we find is that there's an agency like CA which is doing it at national level. There's a lack of clarity as to which agency will do it at the state level. So I think state government also should take a fundamental step in identifying the agency which will do the state level planning. It could be the SLDC, or it could be STU, or it could be a power management company which are there in some of the states. So they can take up this role. But unless the agency is identified, which will be responsible for the state-wise planning, we will not move forward much. Then as regard the tool for planning is concerned, gone are the days that when we could do it with Excel sheets and we could just show that we are able to meet the peak demand for the year and energy requirement. We now need some sophisticated modeling tools, and these modeling tools should be able to also simulate hourly operation as well as operations in the long term also. So this is essential because of renewable variability of renewable sources. Hour to hour, if not 15-minute block-wise simulation, but at least hour-to-hour simulation is quite essential, because things are changing very fast in the time blocks, in the matter of few time blocks. So those kinds of tools are essential, and then states must acquire these tools for this kind of planning. Now, these sophisticated models which I'm talking about should also have this capability to build up some constraints. Like we should be able to specify a minimum RE capacity at a particular date, or we should be also able to give CO2 emission targets for a particular date. These are all kinds of constraints. It is possible in the tools which CA is having at present. So similar kinds of tools should be acquired by the states also, so that they can plan their demand and this energy transition towards zero carbon emission properly. Incidentally, sir, and in this case, sir, what we can do is that CA can play a hand-holding role when the states are acquiring these models. Naturally, they need some capacity building. So CA can play that role and help the states in developing the requisite capacity building in terms of training them or telling them about the models and how to build these models and how to use these models. So that can be done from CA side. So this is, sir, as far as planning is concerned. I will take one or two more issues, and then another issue which I am coming to is that renewable integration. We are talking about ancillary services, which is very essential, but some of the renewable and some of the ancillary services like inertia, like reactive power, like black start facilities, I think they are not very amenable to markets, because some of them are totally local phenomena. Like inertia, you should have it locally at some level. Reactive power support is also required locally. So perhaps market-based solutions are not possible. So what we can do is perhaps broaden the scope of resource adequacy. Once we are envisaging some kind of regulation, maybe from CA side or some regulation in the technical standard form, which will define what is meant by resource adequacy. And when we define the resource adequacy, we should broaden it. Broaden it in terms of when let's say DISCOM goes to his regulator to show that he should not only show that they have the capacity to meet the peak demand or capacity to meet the energy requirement, but also to show that they are able to meet the ramping. They are having enough black start facilities, so that in case of in unfortunate blackout, they will be able to restart as quickly as possible. They have enough inertia in their system to take care of transients. So all these is essential, and this cannot be possible through, it's not possible through markets. Now, another issue which has been flagged in this model is about flexibility. So I think market is the best way or tool to bring in flexibility in operation. But as we know, sir, markets in electricity are not perfect. They are in fact, far from perfect. So what we need to do is also invest enough resources in the form of manpower and algorithms for market monitoring and market surveillance. These are some of the issues which I wanted to touch upon. And as far as states are concerned, sir, it has been already highlighted that the hydro resources are mostly of states. So I will just give a few examples. Like Himachal has taken some initiatives like staggering of free power. They have also waived off half the state GST. So this is basically a trade-off between the immediate gains and the long-term gains and development. So these steps need to be followed. And lastly, I would just mention that as far as off the river PSP are concerned, they have very limited R&R issues. They have very limited geological surprises, and they have very limited environmental issues. So they are, perfectly amenable for competition. So it is better that we develop bankable DPRs in each, and say, let's say, have some pilot projects in one or two pilot projects in each state, and take the advantage of competition so that we can have PSP at the lowest cost. I think here I would like to answer. Then there are a few questions, and I will answer them.
So the next speaker is Dr. A.K. Tripathi, former Director General, National Institute of Solar Energy, and presently advisor to the New and Renewable Energy Ministry. And he has a long experience in planning, development, implementation of various renewable energy programs and projects in the country. So let us hear Dr. Tripathi about his perspective from the planner perspective and from government policies.
Thank you so much, sir. It's indeed a pleasure to be here in this panel. I'm thankful to A.K. Saxena ji for inviting me for this August panel. And we all know that the energy transition is right now taking place in the country. And in the government of India, especially in the renewable energy sector, it is very vibrant nowadays, in which the solar energy, wind energy are playing a vital role in providing the power solutions and meeting the clean power requirement in the country. In fact, now we all know that the net zero and the commitment of the government of India in COP26 has given us a direction, a long-term direction, not to this ministry, but to all the energy sector and the power sector for undertaking the as carbon neutral, as clean, as energy solutions we can provide in this direction. So, in fact, India, as we all know that in the United Nations High-Level Dialogue on Energy, which was held in January 2021, India has been selected as a global champion of energy transition in this dialogue. And in this backdrop, there are many energy compacts. There have been many energy guzzlers companies and energy use utilizer companies. They have given the energy compacts in which they have given a commitment that up to what date and up to what time they are going to come up with the utilization of the clean energy. Just for example, I would start from the government of India's MNRE's commitments. So by 2030, the 500 gigawatt energy the government has planned from the clean energy, solar and wind and biomass and other thing. Then the National Hydrogen Mission, we all know, has been announced, and modalities and the policies are coming up. Very recently, the Ministry of Power has issued a green hydrogen policy. And in this, the mission will scale up the green hydrogen production and utilization across the multiple sectors with a target of 1 metric ton annual green hydrogen production by 2030. So that is also going to be 1 million ton, by 2030. And production of the government has also brought for giving the impetus to the manufacturing sector, because this is a sector in which the India missed the bus in the beginning when we started the renewables development. But today there is a big focus on the production linked incentives, and the solar panels and the other equipment of the wind, they are to be manufactured in India. In fact, wind energy has got a lot of manufacturing in India, but solar energy needs a lot of impetus in this. So a production linked scheme has come up. In the first phase, 4,500 crores were allocated, and about 5.7 gigawatt of the solar module capacity is going to be benefited out of that. In fact, not only the module manufacturing, but from the very starting of the ingot from silicon to the whole chain of production of the module is required. Otherwise, we will be end up in buying the wafers from outside and again making the cells. That is very important. So this has been taken up. Again, in the field of biomass, the 20% ethanol blending in petrol by the ethanol supply by 25 and 26. This is going to give a big boost to the biomass energy. Now, as far as the biomass energy is concerned, in the field of biomass, we know it tackles two problems. One is the burning of the biomass, which creates a lot of pollution. We all experience, those who live in Delhi and NCR area. So this has a dual kind of solution by taking the biomass from the field directly itself and converting it into energy by way of by way of the thermochemical conversion or the biochemical conversion. So these two technologies are to be promoted. In fact, various biomass technologies have come up, but there is I would always say that a special mission mode like hydrogen and all is required in the field of biomass also. Otherwise, the biomass lacks basically the supply chain. Because of the supply chain, some problem comes. So that issue has to be tackled, and then the biomass can also provide a good source of energy in the country. Further, the energy transition, what I feel is that hydrogen, we are doing solar, biomass, storage is also one of the very important, because renewable in a long term for a 24/7 storage is required. So today still there is no any technology which is viable, technologically viable, commercially viable for a large capacity storage and for a long time storage.
Sorry to interrupt, Dr. Tripathi. Can I ask you about what support Government of India is planning to give for R&D initiatives, particularly in hydrogen and other storage?
In the R&D, sir, we have in the Government of India, in the R&D initiative, we have our research and development scheme, in which with up to 50% support will be provided if provided the industry oriented project is developed, institution, industry, and the developer. So this model is being promoted, in which up to 50% support will be provided for production of the system. And in fact, in the national hydrogen missions, the policy is still under development. I think after the approval of the cabinet and all, it will come in force. So it is still from the government of ministry side, the policy is under development stage, but from R&D side, there is a support available. Up to 100% can also be considered, depending upon the type of project, and if some good project comes up, and institutions, government institutions are also involved in this. Then the storage is also one of the area in which the ministry is concentrating. In the existing solar power plants or wind power plants, for the grid stability is very, very much required. So storage is being given a focus, but we need some robust technology, cheap technology, which can work in this direction. So I would just end up here and mention that the Government of India is committed for providing the clean energy. All the targets are set. and all players have to be geared up in this direction.
Thank you, Dr. Pati. Thank you.
Thank you.
The last speaker in this session is Colonel Vijay Bhaskar. Colonel Vijay Bhaskar is Managing Director of Hamara Grid Private Limited, and we would like to learn from him about his experience in developing mini grids and how they are planning to scale up and how these have helped in the development of rural economy.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you so much. So we've been working in this last mile space for almost about 10 to 15 years now, and started it in West Bengal, moved to Jharkhand, worked in UP, Bihar, worked in Myanmar, 5 regions, and now in Nagaland. And in fact, at this point, I'm sitting in almost the easternmost part of India, Mon district on the Myanmar border, and wondering why all this. And we're feeling very positive with what all the speakers before have brought out. And but I'm hoping like hell that this renewable energy transition happens and these areas also get to benefit. Now, we have managed to sort of connect all these villages with wires and cables. But the electricity that is available to the villages all over Northeast India, and I'm speaking for almost like 5,000-6,000 villages of the Northeast, it's not more than 5 to 8 hours per day, and which of not of a very good quality and not reliable at all, which means electricity is random, and they really can't plan any enterprise, business enterprises around availability of electricity. Now, having said that, how do you sort of now make this happen? So we've been working in the mini grid space, trying to make a commercially viable model on how to supply to the last mile in a self-contained system. So I have a few sort of thoughts around this. A full service mini grid. I call it a full service because the inverter should be have a capacity that is looking at 5 years hence. The storage should be looking at 5 years hence, not for today's. There should be a very highly sophisticated lightning protection system. The line should be running, of very high quality. The distribution network needs to be of a very high quality, requiring less maintenance, smart metering, and a whole lot of other sophistication around the grid, which can be remotely monitored. If you have all these things and you're looking at a 250 household village, which is the average in the Northeast, then the investment is to the tune of 3 lakhs per kilowatt. That means a 250 household village requiring 30 kilowatt kind of plant that is catering for today's needs and expandable to 50-60 kilowatt going 3-4 years down the line is going to cost almost 1 crore. That's the capex that is there. So when you talk about renewable energy in rural area, it's not about setting up a very large megawatt scale plant somewhere and feeding into the 30 kilowatt line. That may cost you 5-6 rupees, but it's really not feasible in this trans-Himalayan region. Very, very difficult to do that. So you need to have independent mini grids that supply to the village need, not just for today, but what's going to happen 3 years, 4 years, 10 years down the line. And how do you do that? You need to have modularity of design. You need to have a larger capacity inverters. You need to have storage that caters for a much higher capacity till the time the battery is going to be replaced after 4-5 years. And still, when you start supplying, because these villages are not used to consuming electricity, the demand is as less as 20 units per village per day. And from 20 units, if you want to take it to about 100 units, which the 30 kilowatt plant is capable of supplying, you need to work with the villagers on a whole range of things, from not just with the villagers, but with the entire ecosystem as a whole. And which is exactly what we are trying to do in Nagaland, in the Mon district. We created an SPV for the project, Mithun Rural Development Foundation. We signed an MOU with the district administration for developing all the 132 villages of Mon district over the next 3 years. We've signed up with each of the village councils for a 20-year agreement for a build, own, operate, maintain, and develop the village. The last part is most important, because if you're going to look at electricity demand of today, it's extremely low, and it's not worth setting up even a megawatt scale plant somewhere and supplying at a 30 kilowatt line. It's not going to happen. So it's too low. It's 20 kilowatt hours per village per day. I mean, laying a line, a distribution network to supply that is not possible. It's not viable, commercially viable, and therefore you need to increase demand, and that is really not what discoms can do. So we work with the villagers. Once we set up the plant, give them 24/7 electricity on a prepaid meter, and mind you, this capex that I'm talking about entails a LCOE, a levelized cost of electricity over a life cycle of the plant of almost 20 rupees per kilowatt hour. Now, can the villagers pay 20 rupees per kilowatt hour? Yes, they do. I mean, that's a myth which I want to burst. My villagers pay 25 rupees per kilowatt hour on an average, and sometimes more. But that is linked with development. It is not for lighting and mobile charging. This is for running micro enterprises. This is for linking them with markets. This is for developing handicraft businesses. This is for building business chains along the line. If in a Naga village he grows Naga chilies, which are the high premium on the market, but unfortunately it's going to sort of harvested at monsoon time, and monsoons are very heavy here. So if we can't dry those chilies and if he has to put it on a smoked fire to dry it, it loses its premium. He can't sell it. They grow. It's such an agriculturally fertile region. They grow ginger, they grow turmeric, they grow cardamom, they grow tea, they grow coffee. But none of that can be processed and sold to outside markets because it doesn't have reliable electricity. And this is something that we work on. Once we set up these plants, we work on these enterprises initially with help from the district administration and with the village councils. We come up with a methodology of payments, which the village pays for street lights, the village pays for the health center, the schools, the morangs, the educational institutions, the church. All that is powered, but everything is paid for by the village. But why? And once this happens, then we start looking at other chains. They're very good with handicraft. So we tied up with the export processing export house in Dimapur. They send us the designs. We set up workshops in the village. They make these. They're very good with this stuff. And they make it, send it over there, and export happens. We're looking at ecotourism. This place is really beautiful. The low hills, excellent scenery. So travel tourism, I mean, ecotourism around villages, homestays, luxury tourism in some very beautiful spots with budding entrepreneurs. But all this needs financing. So how does that happen? So, and as I said, the larger the size of the plant, it starts becoming commercially viable. But to get to that size, you need time. And to get to that kind of time, you require 3 to 4 years to make that happen, is where you require some philanthropic capital, a bit of it. That is blended with equity, that's blended with carbon finance, that's blended with concessional debt from institutions like NABARD. So we work with Rockefeller Foundation, Shell Foundation, ONGC Foundation to bring in some philanthropic capital. We work with institutions like WRI who monitor impact on the social part of the project. And we work with carbon finance companies for carbon credits and put this whole piece together and make it work. So this is a pilot that we're working on. It's a 138 village pilot built on a PPP model. That's public-private people's partnership. The village pitches in with 5% of the capital cost, which is almost like 5 to 8 lakhs per village. They also pitch in with concessional land for the plant. They ensure right of way. The district administration helps out with the logistics. They bring in all the departments of the government like renewable energy, rural development, health, education, and try and broad-base the entire thing, synergize their efforts in each of these villages so that we can have a very holistic developmental model. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you, Colonel Bhaskar. I think you are doing a superb job. And today I have learned about PPPP. Okay, great. And one thing I was very happy to see that you are taking care of its operation and maintenance for next 20 years, because that is something that was question which was coming to my mind about the sustainability of this model. Thank you so much. So now, are there any questions from the panel? Any questions from the panel?
So, sir, we don't find any question. I think if there are any questions in the chat box, our colleagues will pass it on. But in the meantime, we could move forward with the concluding remarks by Mr. K. Ramanathan, and thereafter a vote of thanks by our Director General, Dr. Vibha.
Okay.
So I would like to thank you, sir, and all the panelists for the wonderful discussion we have had. And I think the perspective which we got is really very wide-ranging, very comprehensive, and there are a lot of important issues and the areas which are flagged that how do we take this energy transition journey forward in India. And Mr. Narasimhan very rightly said that it is an ultra marathon, and we have to continue doing things, and we have to be revisiting our own modeling assumptions, the and various sort of initiatives which one can think of today. I think they will periodically need to be reviewed, and the studies need to be carried out accordingly. Thank you, sir. I would like to thank you and all the panelists for their wonderful contribution and sparing their valuable time. May I now request Mr. K. Ramanathan, distinguished fellow TERI and former member Power Systems CEA. He needs no introduction to this and any other audience. Mr. Ramanathan, please.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Saxena. I should say I was really delighted to be a member of this group of discussions because there was a lot to learn and many of the points which are very dear and passionate to me. I cannot sum up in this short time, but a few points which I noted or noticed, which I have been telling internally we were discussing, you will recall, is whatever we develop now, you also said it is based on the present conditions. Things are changing so fast. Minister also talked about it. Technological development are taking place. So we really don't know beyond 2030. The picture has become hazier and hazier. What are the options? For example, we talked quite a bit on demand. Demand, I think demand can change. The magnitude of demand will change. The pattern will change depending upon our changes in lifestyle. Then again, for example, hydrogen, I have been talking to you again because there is a major game changer. We can increase the renewable energy demand. We can decrease the requirement, the need for flexibility. All these could change. There are many, many things. Then demand response. We have been working on it for last few years. This can totally change the picture. There is a lot of scope. So the basic thing when you say transition is what are we trying to ultimately achieve? We want to meet the demand, access for all, to meet the social needs and 24/7 with quality and reliability of supply. If that be the case, our first step should be to reassess the demand very carefully, periodically, incorporating whatever technology development has been taking place. Similarly, Minister also talked about the supply side. Yes, beyond your solar, we have to think beyond solar. I have also been always talking about this. Say, for example, hydro he mentioned is a passionate subject for me. And he also talked about off-river pump storage. We have submitted, I was also a member of the International Forum for Pump Storage. We have submitted a detailed note to the Ministry of Power on which was, I think, brought out in COP26 also on what are the policy and regulatory measures that can be adopted to promote pump storage. Those I mentioned about the Madhya Pradesh pump storage, I read only 2 days back, there's a 6 gigawatt pump storage coming up in Andhra Pradesh by Green Coal. It's a private company. So things are changing, taking place. So whatever storage assumptions we have been taking, for example, batteries or any other option, things can change. So the final point is whatever strategy we are formulating has to be flexible because things are changing so fast. I remember when I developed the national power plan, when I was in CEA, the renewable energy we were taking as a small input, it can be a reserve if it comes. But today the picture is changed. So our approach and strategies have changed. And lastly, very important point which I think Rakesh has also mentioned, dear to all of us, is the security of supply. Security and reliability of supply. because I would give it higher weightage to security and reliability of supply as to the cost. Cost is important, but then reliability and quality of supply are equally important or much more important, I would say. Then Colonel Vijay Bhaskar talked about distributed energy resources. That could also change the demand. And I heard in another webinar during the pandemic, people want a reliable supply. It's not much of the cost. So we have to really give importance to the reliability of supply. Then Saxena also talked about the cross-border, ISO, or one sun, one world, one grid. All these could change the picture what we are presenting today. And we have got many studies done by many organizations. So my final request is, let us not work in silos. Let's pool our resources together. Let there be a free data exchange. That's a major concern, not only within the sector, but also we need data from the meteorological department also. All these efforts are extremely important, and we have to keep track of all these developments. So let us keep our ears and eyes open and go ahead. We have made a very good beginning. Let's hope we are able to move forward. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Sir, thank you so much for your insightful remarks. Yes, certainly the flexible strategy formulation is what is needed in this changing technologies, changing consumer behavior, changing cost trajectories. Certainly, sir. Thank you so much for your remarks, sir. May I now request Director General TERI, Dr. Vibha Dhawan, to give a vote of thanks and give her impressions as well. Over to you, Dr. Dhawan.
Yeah, thank you so much. In fact, we are running short of time. We are already late by almost 15 minutes. But I would like to express my heartfelt greetings to all the distinguished dignitaries and dear participants. I'm really delighted to participate in this thematic session on fostering energy transition in India. I'm thankful to all the esteemed speakers for being part of this session, and especially Mr. Alok Kumar, Secretary Ministry of Power, for his keynote address, and Mr. Rakesh Kumar for moderating this session so well. In a way, all of you are experts, and whatever I wanted to say, you have already listed it in a much better way. It's very rightly mentioned that the electricity sector is expected to grow and transform immensely over the next few decades. And it is driven by the ambition for rapid economic growth through the mid-century and a determined push to elevate living standards via widespread electrification. And especially this growth is going to take place more in the rural part of the country, because it's only recently when it is done that every village has to be electrified. So therefore, that's also going to increase the demand. And I put it that it's not demand of electricity, it is that we are bringing them in the path of growth for the country. Because otherwise their day ends once the sun sets, and then they can't do anything. So one will be ensuring that they also become drivers for the economic growth for the country. At the same time, when we look at long-held views about the future of India's energy system, they are being challenged by rapid reduction in the cost of variable renewable electricity and a strong policy push towards a greener and cleaner electricity sector. Few years back, yes, solar is not something new, because in TERI we are talking about solar energy since 1980s, early 80s. But then all the time it was that it's unreliable. How do you store it? What is the cost? How long will be the payback period if you put solar in your house or for any other application? But now it has been proved that it is economical and the payback period is very little. And this is resulting in share of renewable electricity that is becoming more common with these changes. It's also, like, I'll say that one is still tossing, like you are talking about providing energy or solar energy for pumping water for agriculture purposes. So these things becomes interlinked, what is going to happen to the water security or water table, because then the water or electricity is available to the farmer all the time and they'll be pumping water. So what is going to be the correlation between the two, and should it be that the electricity, putting it back to the grid, becomes second assured crop kind of for the farmer? So that's another angle one should look into. So this balancing of electricity creation and distribution, that needs to be looked very carefully. If we look at what our Prime Minister had committed at COP26, we are talking of increasing target of renewables many folds in next few years, as well as decarbonization or net zero for the industry. So that shows that government is very, very serious about taking this initiative. So it reflects on the government policy, and somewhere it is also that what is voluntary today, what corporates are trying to do, in years to come, it can become mandatory. And therefore, there is need to integrate resource planning study, and which has been discussed during this session today, that how to move forward for deep decarbonization in the power sector. Although the date given is 2050, but I won't be surprised in India. I have full confidence Indian corporates will move towards it, and they would like to do it at least 3 years before, and that is 2047, when we'll celebrate our centenary of independence. So I really enjoyed the discussions, and really speaking, I'll say that you all have done a lot of work and you will continue doing it, taking India or bringing India as a leader in renewable energy and energy transition. So thank you very much once again, and look forward to seeing you in person sometime. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Vibha. Thanks a lot for your concluding remarks and the impressions which you gave about. Certainly, I think we also look forward to preponing the net zero target as far as possible, and the studies need to be focusing onto that. How can we make that happen is really the key issue. And I think, as many of the speakers told about, and Mr. Ramnathal also summed it, that I think there are a lot of technological changes, the cost reductions which are going to happen, and no wonder that we may do it sooner than later. I think with this remarks, I would like to give a big thank you to all the panelists, the speakers, especially Mr. Rakesh Nath for sparing his valuable time, and our own TERI team who has worked very tirelessly for organizing this event and making it a success. Thank you all, sir, and we will certainly meet very soon in person, as mentioned by Dr. Vibha Dhawan. Thank you so much.